This story is not about conclusions, it's about context. Nick Reiner is facing some of the most serious allegations possible, but before the legal process plays out, many people are asking a different question. Who was he before this moment? And what do we actually know about his life leading up to it? According to publicly available information, Nick Reiner, the son of filmmaker Rob Reiner and Michele Reiner, was taken into custody in December 2025, shortly after his parents were found deceased in their Los Angeles home. Prosecutors later announced their intention to file charges, and the case is now moving through the legal system. At this stage, it's important to be clear. These are allegations, not verdicts. The legal process is ongoing, and no final determination has been made. Still, the case has drawn widespread attention, in part because of Nick Reiner's past, a history he spoke about openly years before any of this happened, long before his name appeared. In headlines connected to a criminal investigation, Nick Reiner was known as a screenwriter who had publicly shared his struggles with substance addiction. According to past interviews and reporting, his challenges began when he was a teenager. Nick has spoken about developing a heroin addiction around the age of 15. Over the years, he reportedly entered rehabilitation programs numerous times, describing a cycle of relapse and recovery that extended across much of his youth and early adulthood. In interviews from the mid-2010s, Nick did not present his story as one of instant redemption. Instead, he described a long period of instability, including times when he did not have stable housing. In a 2015 interview, he recalled being homeless in several different states, explaining that his refusal to follow certain treatment paths left him without family support at times. He described spending nights and weeks on the street, emphasizing that those years were deeply difficult and disorienting. At the same time, he also spoke about how those experiences shaped his perspective. According to his own words, the hardship forced him to confront realities far outside the world he grew up in, exposing him to people and situations that permanently changed how he saw himself and others. During that period, Nick began channeling his experiences into creative work. His 2015 film, Being Charlie, follows a young person struggling with addiction and recovery. The project was personal, and notably it was directed by his father, Rob Reiner. That collaboration marked a turning point in how Nick publicly described his relationship with his parents. In earlier interviews, Nick acknowledged that his bond with his father had been complicated when he was younger. They didn't share many interests growing up, and he felt disconnected for years. But working together on a film changed that dynamic, giving him a new sense of closeness and mutual understanding. Rob Reiner later reflected on that period as well, publicly acknowledging that he and Michele had struggled to navigate their son's addiction. In past interviews, Rob admitted that, out of desperation, they sometimes trusted professionals over their son's own voice, a decision he later questioned. Michele Reiner echoed that sentiment, explaining that they were told Nick was manipulating them and that they believed it at the time. Looking back, both parents expressed regret over not listening more closely to what their son was telling them about his needs. These reflections were shared years before the current legal case and paint a picture of a family that experienced long-term strain, miscommunication, and emotional distance, alongside ongoing efforts to reconnect. Importantly, there is no public record indicating that Nick Reiner had been arrested prior to December 2025. By all available accounts, the arrest connected to his parents' deaths marked his first involvement with the criminal justice system at that level. As the case proceeds, much of the public conversation has focused on how a person with such a history, one involving addiction, recovery attempts, family conflict, and creative expression, could end up at the center of such a serious investigation. But those questions don't come with easy answers. Addiction experts often emphasize that substance use disorders are complex, long-term conditions that intersect with mental health, family dynamics, and access to support. Past struggles do not automatically explain or predict later actions, especially in cases involving allegations that are still being examined in court. What is clear is that Nick Reiner's past was already marked by instability long before this case emerged. His own words describe years he later referred to as dark, followed by a gradual return to family life and relative stability in Los Angeles. Whether and how that history relates to the present allegations is something only the legal process can determine. For now, What remains is a timeline, one that shows a person who openly discussed his struggles, a family that publicly reflected on its mistakes, and a case that now asks the justice system to determine what happened next. And that leads to a deeper, unresolved question. When someone's past is already defined by public vulnerability, how does that shape the way their present is judged, fairly or not? That question becomes even more complicated when we look at the timing, the legal charges being considered, and how the public narrative is forming before a trial has even begun. As the legal case moves forward, much of the public discussion has shifted from what is known to what is assumed, and that shift is exactly where things become complicated. According to statements from the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, prosecutors announced their intent to file charges related to the deaths of Rob Reiner and Michele Reiner. The announcement outlined the counts being considered, but it did not present a full narrative of events. That information will only emerge through court proceedings. At this stage, the details that matter most are also the ones that remain unavailable. Law enforcement has not publicly released a complete timeline of what occurred inside the home. Officials have not shared specific evidence, witness accounts, or forensic conclusions beyond what is legally required at this early phase. Much of what people think they know is coming from fragments, headlines, summaries, and speculation filling in the gaps. And that vacuum is where Nick Reiner's past often gets pulled into the conversation. When someone has openly discussed addiction, homelessness, and emotional instability, those chapters can quickly become shorthand explanations in the public imagination. But legal experts consistently warn against this kind of narrative shortcut. A person's history does not equal proof. Past struggles do not establish present guilt. And vulnerability, when viewed through the lens of a criminal investigation, can easily be misinterpreted as causation rather than context. That distinction matters, especially in a case involving a well-known family. Rob Reiner was not just a filmmaker. He was a public figure whose work spanned decades, whose voice extended into politics and culture, and whose family life had occasionally been discussed in interviews. Michele Reiner was similarly known within creative and philanthropic circles. Because of that visibility, the case has attracted attention far beyond a typical criminal proceeding. But visibility doesn't simplify truth, it complicates it. In past interviews, Nick spoke about how being the child of well-known parents created its own pressures. Access, expectations, and scrutiny existed alongside privilege. And during his years of addiction, those dynamics often intensified feelings of isolation rather than reducing them. That doesn't excuse anything. It explains something else. When families navigate addiction, even with resources, the emotional toll can stretch over years. Nick's parents later acknowledged that they struggled to distinguish between manipulation and genuine distress, a confusion many families facing addiction experience. Those admissions, made long before this case, now feel heavier in retrospect. Not because they predict what happened, but because they reveal how long the family had been living with unresolved strain. As the legal process unfolds, the court will focus on evidence, timelines, and facts, not interviews from a decade ago. But public opinion rarely waits for that process to finish. Social media, commentary channels, and opinion pieces often move faster than the justice system. In doing so, they risk collapsing a complex human history into a single narrative arc. That's why responsible reporting matters here. Nick Reiner has the right to due process. The charges announced are serious, but they are still allegations. The burden of proof rests entirely with the prosecution, and the defense will have its opportunity to respond. Until then, anything beyond the confirmed legal filings remains incomplete. What we can say, based on publicly available information, is that this is not a story that began in December 2025. It began decades earlier, with a family trying, imperfectly, to navigate addiction, creativity, distance, and reconciliation. It is also not a story that ends with an arrest. The coming months will determine what facts are established in court, what interpretations hold up under scrutiny, and what remains unknown. And those outcomes will matter far more than speculation ever could. But there is one reason this case continues to resonate so deeply. It forces an uncomfortable reflection. How do we talk about addiction when it intersects with crime? How do we separate empathy from accountability? And how do we avoid turning someone's past vulnerability into a verdict before a trial has even begun? Those questions don't have easy answers, but they are essential ones. And as this case moves forward, they may become just as important as the legal outcome itself.